The first time I realized my parents had destroyed my life, I was sitting in a job interview pretending not to throw up. The manager across the desk kept glancing at a piece of paper like it was radioactive. His name was Mark Reynolds, mid-50s, crew cut, faded Ohio State sweatshirt. The kind of guy who probably coached Little League and drank Bud Light at backyard barbecues. 5 minutes earlier he'd been smiling. Now he looked like someone had just told him his dog died. "Caroline," he said slowly, folding his hands together. "Before we go any further, I need to ask you something." My stomach tightened. "Sure." He slid the paper toward himself again like he didn't want me to see it. "Is there anything in your background that might come up in a background check?" I blinked. "No." His eyes searched my face. "Because someone called us yesterday." The room suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. "Okay," I said carefully. He cleared his throat. "They said you have a felony theft conviction." For a moment my brain simply stopped working. "Excuse me." "They said you stole from a previous employer." My mouth opened, closed, opened again. "That's not true." He looked uncomfortable. "I figured you'd say that." "I've never been arrested," I said quickly. "Not once. I've never even had a speeding ticket." He rubbed his forehead. "I believe you want me to believe you," he said. That sentence hit harder than a punch, because it meant he didn't. And right then I realized something horrifying. Someone had called him on purpose. Someone who knew exactly where I applied. Someone who wanted me to fail. The interview ended 3 minutes later. He walked me to the door like he felt guilty. "I'm sorry, Caroline." I nodded like I understood. But inside my chest something ugly was forming. A question I didn't want the answer to. The drive home to Harlem, Ohio felt longer than usual. It's the kind of town where everybody waves even if they don't know you. One grocery store, one gas station, one high school football team. People act like it's the NFL. Population barely 4,000, and in that town, my family had a reputation. The Johansons were good people. My dad, Gerald Johansson, had worked 20 years as a plant manager before the factory shut down. My mom, Denise Johansson, volunteered at the church food drive every Thanksgiving. Neighbors trusted them, respected them, thought they raised the perfect daughter. What nobody saw was the cage. I didn't get my own house key until I was 20. My dad said it was for safety. I couldn't drive more than 10 miles without telling them where I was going. My phone location had to stay on. When I got my first job bussing tables at Route 30 Diner at 14, my paychecks went into a joint account my mom controlled. "Just until you're responsible," she'd said. I never saw a statement. Never saw a balance. Never asked. Because in our house questioning things meant arguments, and arguments meant punishment. So I kept my head down. Graduated valedictorian, top of my class. My guidance counselor begged me to apply for scholarships. "You could go anywhere," she told me. I brought the brochures home. My dad didn't even open them. "College is for people who can't work with their hands." And that was the end of the conversation. For years I told myself they were just protective. That's what controlling parents say. And kids believe it because believing the truth is worse. But the week after my 25th birthday, something inside me cracked. I was standing at the kitchen sink scrubbing the same cast iron skillet I'd scrubbed since I was 12. And a thought hit me like lightning. I'm going to be 40 years old doing this same thing. Same sink, same house, same rules. And suddenly the air felt too heavy to breathe. The next morning I walked to the Harlem Public Library. The computers there were ancient. Sticky keyboards. 15-minute session limits. I sat down, created a new email account my parents didn't know about. Then I searched job listings in nearby towns. My heart was pounding so hard my fingers shook. It felt like committing a crime. I applied to a hardware store in Millfield. Full-time. Benefits after 90 days. When I hit submit, I actually looked over my shoulder. Like someone might arrest me. 2 days later an email arrived. Interview Thursday at 10 a.m. Hope exploded in my chest. For the first time in years, my life felt possible. But that night at dinner something felt off. My dad sat at the head of the table reading the newspaper. My mom washed dishes that were already clean. Nobody talked. Nobody asked about my day, but my dad kept glancing at me over the top of the paper. Like he knew something. I told myself I was imagining it. I wasn't. 2 days later, my first interview ended with a lie about a criminal record. I walked into the house that afternoon trying to act normal. Dad was sitting on the porch, newspaper open. He didn't even look up. "How was your day, sweetheart?" My fingers tightened around my car keys. "Fine." "Good." He turned the page casually. "Your mom made pot roast." I stared at the back of that newspaper. Something inside me whispered a terrible thought. Did they know? I shoved the thought away immediately. Parents don't sabotage their kids. Parents protect their kids. Right? Over the next 6 weeks, I applied to 3 more jobs: a grocery store, a warehouse, a diner. All 3 invited me to interviews. All 3 canceled within 2 days. The diner owner finally told me the truth. She leaned across the counter, lowered her voice. "Honey, someone called about you." My chest tightened. "What did they say?" Her expression softened with pity. "That you've got a criminal record." The words hit like a punch. "Did they say who they were?" She said she was a concerned neighbor. Concerned neighbor. The phrase echoed in my head the whole drive home. Because only one person in my life loved that phrase. My mother. That night I couldn't sleep. At midnight I slipped down the hallway toward my mom's sewing room. The one place in the house she guarded like Fort Knox. I opened the desk drawer slowly. Inside were fabric scraps, pins, receipts, and one small blue notebook. My stomach tightened. I opened it. My mother's handwriting filled the pages, neat, organized, precise. Left column: Millfield Hardware, Ridgeway, Freshmart, County Line Logistics, Cooperton Diner, every place I'd applied. Right column: red check marks, one beside every single job. My knees went weak. I gripped the desk to stay standing. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't coincidence. My mother was tracking my job applications. Tracking them, and destroying them. The next morning I placed the notebook on the kitchen table. My parents were drinking coffee. The radio played old country music. Everything looked normal. I pushed the notebook forward. "Explain this." My mom froze. Coffee spilled onto the counter. Her face went pale. Then the tears started. But they weren't guilt tears. They were angry tears. "You went through my things," she whispered. My voice shook. "You called my employers." "I did it because I love you." My dad calmly buttered toast. "We're protecting you," he said. "You're narve. I can take care of myself." He smiled. "No, you can't." My chest burned. "If you don't stop," I said, "I'm leaving." His eyes went cold. "You walk out that door. You walk out with nothing." That night I packed a backpack. 2 outfits. Toothbrush, phone charger, and a photo of my grandmother Maggie. When I stepped into the hallway, my mom was waiting, arms crossed. "If you leave," she said quietly, "you're dead to us." My dad stood behind her like a wall. I stepped outside anyway. Pulled out my phone. Opened my bank app. Balance $0. Every paycheck I'd ever earned was gone. My mom had emptied the account. "Give me my birth certificate," I said through the door. "Those belong to this house," my dad replied. Then he closed the door. At 9:47 p.m., I walked down the driveway. I had a backpack, lure 12 cash, lay dying phone battery, no ID, no plan. I sat outside a gas station on Route 30 watching trucks pass under the fluorescent lights. At 11:16 p.m. my phone buzzed. A text from my father. "Come home, apologize, maybe I'll stop." I turned the phone off. Not because I was brave, because the battery was at 1%. And that was the night my life officially fell apart. 3 months later, I was living in a homeless shelter, eating one meal a day, and learning something terrifying. My parents hadn't stopped sabotaging my life. They had upgraded. The moment I realized my parents weren't just controlling, they were willing to destroy my entire life. I was sitting on a thin mattress in a homeless shelter holding a rejection phone call. Again, "Caroline, I'm really sorry," the man said on the phone. His name was Dave, manager of a family restaurant 35 miles south in Granton, Ohio. He had sounded excited 2 days earlier. Said my interview went great. Said they needed someone reliable. Said I'd hear from him by Friday. Now his voice sounded awkward, careful, like someone walking through broken glass. "We've decided to move forward with another candidate." My stomach dropped. "Can I ask why?" There was a pause, a long one. Then he sighed. "Someone emailed us something about you." Cold spread through my chest. "What kind of something?" "Look, I'm not accusing you of anything," he said quickly. "But it looked like a police report." My fingers tightened around the phone. "What did it say?" "That you were arrested for fraud." For a moment I couldn't breathe. "I've never been arrested." "I figured you'd say that." "You don't understand," I said, my voice shaking. "Someone is lying about me." He hesitated. "I believe you might believe that." That sentence again. The polite version of "I don't believe you." "I'm sorry, Caroline," he said, "but we can't take the risk." The call ended, and I sat there staring at the cracked ceiling above bed 14. Because this time, it wasn't a phone call, it was a fake police report. By then I had been living at Harland Community Shelter for almost 4 months. It used to be a warehouse. Now it held 20 metal frame beds, one shared bathroom, and a kitchen that always smelled like canned soup. The lights buzzed all night. Sleep came in short, shallow bursts. The woman who ran the shelter was named Linda Marsh. 47, short brown hair, reading glasses that always slid down her nose. She had a voice that could calm a hurricane. The day I arrived, she handed me a towel and said something I'll never forget. "You don't have to explain how you got here." She pointed to a bed. "You just have to decide if you're getting back up." At the time I didn't know if I could, but I tried. Without identification, life becomes a maze. No ID means no job. No job means no apartment. No apartment means no way to receive official documents. Everything locks everything else. I spent weeks trying to replace my paperwork. Birth certificate requests, social security forms, DMV visits, each office sending me somewhere else. Come back in 3 weeks. Bring another form of ID. Mail this request. The system was built for people who already had everything. People like me fell through the cracks. So while I waited, I worked at the shelter. Not for money, for food. I washed dishes, mopped floors, organized donated clothes. I needed to feel useful. Needed to feel like my life still had direction. And every few days I applied for another job. Farther and farther away. Towns my parents had never heard of. I thought distance would protect me. I was wrong. After the fake police report rejection, I knew something had changed. My parents had escalated. Phone calls were one thing. Anyone could make a phone call. But a forged document, that required planning, effort, and a printer. My father had spent 19 years managing a factory. He knew how official documents looked. How memos were formatted. How to make something look convincing. The thought made my stomach twist. Because it meant something terrifying. My parents weren't panicking. They were strategizing. That night my phone buzzed. Unknown number, but I already knew who it was. The text read, "Still cold out there." My throat tightened. Another message appeared. "Doors still open." My hands trembled, because I understood the message perfectly. They were watching. Waiting. Every rejection. Every failure. Every time I struggled, they were there, reminding me I could come back. If I apologized. If I gave up. If I surrendered. I deleted the messages, but the damage was done. That Sunday my dad called. I don't know why I answered. Maybe because I was exhausted. Maybe because a part of me still hoped he'd say something different. "Caroline," he said. His voice sounded calm, almost gentle. "Come home, stop calling my employers." Silence. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I saw the notebook, Dad." Another pause. "What notebook?" "Mum's list. 5 seconds passed. 10. Then he laughed softly. You've always been dramatic. My heart pounded. You're ruining my life. No, he said. You're ruining your own. How? You're not ready for the real world. The anger inside me boiled over. I'm homeless because of you. You're homeless because you're stubborn. My throat tightened. I'm hanging up. You hang up, he said quietly. You lose this family. I stared at the shelter wall. Peeling paint. A faded emergency exit sign. I already lost it, I whispered. Then I ended the call. After that, the phone calls stopped, but the texts continued. Always once a week. Always the same tone. Friendly. Casual. Manipulative. Thanksgiving's coming. Your mom baked your favorite pie. Heard it snowed. Hope you're staying warm. Each one designed to make me doubt myself. To make it seem like they cared. But never once did they say, we'll stop. So I saved every message. Every single one. I didn't know why yet. But something in my gut told me I might need them someday. One night while I was restocking the shelter supply closet, Linda leaned against the doorway. Caroline. I looked up. What's up? You remember that woman who came by asking about you last month? My stomach tightened. Yeah. She left a business card. Linda pulled it from her pocket. Slightly bent at the corner, she handed it to me. The card read, Ruth Callan, licensed private investigator, State of Ohio. My pulse quickened. A private investigator. My first thought was immediate. My father. He'd hired someone to find me, track me, report my location, maybe even get me kicked out of the shelter. What did she look like? I asked. Mid-50s. Gray hair. Linda shrugged. She didn't seem dangerous. That didn't mean anything. My parents specialized in people who looked harmless. I slipped the card into my pocket. I didn't call. Not yet. I'd been blindsided too many times. A few weeks later, everything got worse. Linda called me into her office. Her door was closed. That alone made my stomach twist. Sit down, she said gently. I did. What's going on? She took off her glasses. I got a phone call today. Cold crept through my chest. From who? A woman claiming to be a social worker. My heart dropped. She said you have a documented history of violence. My hands went numb. She told me you're dangerous to other residents. My mother. It had to be. Linda nodded slowly. I figured as much. What did you tell her? I told her I can't discuss residents. She leaned forward. But if she files an official complaint with the county? Her voice softened. I may not be able to keep you here. The words felt like a punch. My parents had sabotaged my jobs, stolen my money, taken my documents, and now, they were trying to take away the only place I had to sleep. For a moment anger flared inside me, hot and sharp, but then something strange happened. The anger cooled, turned into something clearer, colder, more focused. For the first time since this nightmare started, I stopped reacting, and started thinking. A week later the Harlan Town Council meeting happened, and my father stood up at the podium. I sat in the back row wearing a borrowed jacket, trying not to be noticed. Gerald Johansson cleared his throat. I'm here as a father, he began. His voice trembled, perfectly rehearsed. My daughter left home and fell into bad company. Gasps rippled through the room. She's living in a homeless shelter. I clenched my fists. I've tried to bring her home. He paused dramatically, but she refuses. In the front row my mother wiped fake tears. Neighbors reached over to comfort her. She's my little girl. My father continued, and I just want her safe. People started turning around, looking at me, whispering, pitying, judging. In their eyes, he was the heartbroken father, and I was the rebellious daughter. The meeting ended without anyone asking my side. I walked out the side door silently. Because I had learned something important. When your accuser cries in public, people stop listening to the accused. But that night, as I sat on my shelter bed, staring at the ceiling, I kept thinking about something my grandmother Maggie once told me. We were sitting on her porch drinking sweet tea. She looked out at the fields and said quietly, if things ever get real bad, someone will come find you. I laughed at the time. Grandma, what are you talking about? She didn't laugh. She just said, I know my son. That memory haunted me now. Because suddenly I wondered, What if she knew? What if she saw this coming? And that's when I remembered the business card still in my pocket. The one from the private investigator. I stared at it for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and dialed. The next morning, a woman walked into the shelter carrying a brown leather briefcase. She sat beside my bed, looked me straight in the eye, and said 7 words that changed my life forever. Your grandmother hired me to find you. The moment she said it, my brain refused to process the words. Your grandmother hired me to find you. I stared at the woman sitting beside my shelter bed. Mid-50s. Calm, sharp eyes that looked like they'd seen every kind of lie a human could tell. Her name was Ruth Kalan. And between us on the mattress sat an old brown leather briefcase. My throat felt dry. My grandmother died 3 years ago, I said slowly. Ruth nodded. Yes. Margaret Johansson. Hearing my grandma's full name hit me like a punch to the chest. Because nobody called her that. She was Grandma Maggie. The woman who made blueberry pie from scratch. The woman who let me drive her truck when I was 14. The only person in my family who ever looked at me like I wasn't a disappointment waiting to happen. What do you mean she hired you? I asked. Ruth rested one hand on the briefcase. 10 years ago, she said calmly, your grandmother retained my services. My eyebrows shot up. 10 years. That's correct. That meant I did the math automatically. I was 18. Ruth nodded. She was worried about you? My stomach twisted. Why? Ruth didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned the briefcase toward me. On the leather surface were 5 faded words written in black marker. I knew the handwriting instantly. My chest tightened, because it was my grandmother's. It said for Caroline. When she's ready. My fingers trembled as I touched the case. She knew. I whispered. Ruth's eyes softened slightly. Yes? She knew what my parents would do? She suspected. The air inside the shelter suddenly felt heavy. How? Ruth leaned back in the chair. Because she spent 30 years married to a man exactly like your father. I blinked. My grandfather. Yes. I'd barely known him. He died when I was 7. Everyone always said he was a hard man. I never understood what that meant, until now. Your grandmother recognized the pattern, Ruth continued. Control, isolation, financial dependency. Every word felt painfully accurate. She believed that if you ever tried to leave home, your parents would do everything possible to stop you. A chill ran down my spine, because that was exactly what had happened. How long have you been watching them? I asked. Ruth opened the briefcase. 5 years closely, she said. 10 years intermittently. My stomach flipped. You've been watching my parents for 10 years. She reached inside the case, pulled out a thick manila folder, set it on the bed. I've been documenting them. My pulse quickened. What kind of documentation? She opened the folder. Inside were neatly organized sections. Notes, photographs, printed emails, audio transcripts. My eyes widened. This is evidence, she said calmly. Then she pointed to the first tab, phone calls. My heart pounded as she flipped it open. Page after page of transcripts, each labeled with dates, each documenting a call made by my mother. The words jumped out at me. Concerned neighbor. Background issue. Criminal history. The room started spinning. How many? I whispered. Ruth turned to the summary page. 37. 37. My stomach dropped. My mom called 37 employers. Yes. The number felt unreal. Like something out of a nightmare. But how do you have recordings? Ohio is a one-party consent state, Ruth said. I legally recorded them. She flipped another tab. Emails. Printed screenshots appeared. Anonymous messages sent to businesses. Attachments labeled police report. My hands shook. They're fake. Yes. How do you know? Ruth slid a document across the bed. Metadata. She tapped a highlighted line. IP address. I stared at it. The numbers matched one location. My childhood home. They sent them from our house. I whispered. Yes. My father's computer. My father's printer. My father's lies. My chest felt tight. Because suddenly the full scope of what they'd done became clear. They hadn't just interfered with my life, they'd systematically destroyed it. For years. And they thought they'd never be caught. Ruth reached into the briefcase again. There's more. She pulled out a photograph. I froze. It showed my mother sitting at the kitchen table. The same blue notebook open in front of her, red pen in her hand. Checking off another job. My stomach turned. When was this taken? 8 months ago. Through the window. Ruth nodded. Your grandmother instructed me to document everything. I stared at the picture. My own house. My own mother. Planning my failures like a to-do list. Why didn't you stop them? I asked quietly. Ruth held my gaze, because my instructions were very specific. What instructions? She pulled something else from the case. An envelope. Cream-colored. Sealed. My name written across the front in cursive. My breath caught. Is that? Yes. My grandmother's letter. I reached for it slowly. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was unmistakable. Dear Caroline, if you're reading this, things must have gotten bad. I'm sorry I couldn't stop your father while I was alive. I tried. But men like him don't change. They just find new people to control. My eyes blurred with tears. I kept reading. I know he'll try to keep you trapped. He'll say it's because he loves you. It isn't love. Love doesn't cage people. Love sets them free. My throat tightened. I wiped my eyes and continued. Inside this briefcase is everything you need to protect yourself. Use it wisely. Don't use it for revenge. Use it for freedom. And remember this: you are stronger than the cage they built around you. Love always. Grandma Maggie. My hands shook as I lowered the letter. For a moment I couldn't speak. Because suddenly, I wasn't alone anymore. Ruth quietly pulled out one final envelope. This one was yellow. Thick. Official looking. What's that? I asked. Your grandmother's contingency plan. She handed it to me. My heart hammered as I opened it. Inside were legal documents, contracts, trust paperwork, financial statements. The number on the first page made my brain freeze. R340,000. I blinked, then blinked again. Is this? Ruth said. Your inheritance. My mouth went dry. My grandmother left me $300,000. 340,000? Ruth corrected. The room felt unreal. I thought she sold the farm before she died. She did. Where did the money go? Ruth pointed to the paperwork. Into a trust. A trust that had been quietly growing for years. Investments, bonds, interest. And I'm the only beneficiary. Yes. What about my dad? He doesn't know it exists. My heart raced. All this time. Yes? Your grandmother was planning your escape. Tears rolled down my face again. Because suddenly every memory of her made sense. The way she used to squeeze my hand. The way she'd say strange things like, "You deserve a life of your own." She knew. She always knew. But Ruth wasn't finished. There's one more thing your grandmother arranged. I looked up. What? A lawyer. She slid a business card across the bed. Ellen Briggs, civil litigation attorney. What kind of lawyer? I asked. Ruth held my gaze. The kind who sues people. My pulse quickened. You think I can win? Ruth didn't hesitate. With this evidence. She tapped the folder. It's not even close. I stared at the documents again. 37 calls. Fake police reports. Impersonating a social worker. 3 years of sabotage. 3 years of my life stolen. My hands slowly curled into fists. For the first time since leaving home, I felt something different than fear. Power. Cold. Precise. I want to meet this lawyer, I said. Ruth nodded. I thought you might. She closed the briefcase. Because the truth is, she looked directly into my eyes. Your parents didn't just hurt you. They committed multiple crimes. My heart pounded. And once this goes to court. Ruth finished the sentence quietly. The entire town will find out. For the first time in months I smiled. Because suddenly the cage my parents built around me had a door. And I finally had the key. The first time I realized my parents were losing control of the story was the day people in town stopped looking at me like the criminal and started looking at them. It happened on a gray Tuesday morning outside the Harlan Diner. The same diner where I used to wipe down tables after school while my dad bragged to people about what a hard-working kid he was raising. I was sitting in Ellen Briggs' office when my phone buzzed. It was Ruth. Caroline, she said, her voice calm but carrying that quiet thrill she got whenever a plan started working. You might want to sit down. I am sitting. Well, she said, your dad just tried to defend himself at the town council meeting. I blinked. He what? He gave a speech. I leaned back in Ellen's leather chair. Of course he did. My father had always believed that if he stood behind a podium long enough and talked loud enough, people would believe whatever he said. He'd been doing it my whole life. Church meetings, school boards, Little League fundraisers. Gerald Johansson loved an audience, but this time, the audience had access to the internet. And the court filings. Ruth continued. The diner crowd started reading the complaint online this morning. I felt something shift in my chest. Rating it how? Someone printed the court documents and brought them in with their coffee. Of course they did. Small towns run on two things, caffeine and gossip, and when those two mix with public legal records, truth spreads faster than wildfire. Ruth laughed softly. Apparently people passed the papers around like a church bulletin. I pictured it perfectly. Men in flannel jackets leaning over laminated diner tables. Waitresses pausing mid-coffee refill. Eyes scanning lines that said things like, 37 documented calls to employers. Fabricated police reports. Impersonation of a social worker. And for the first time, the math wasn't adding up anymore, because the version of me my parents had spent years selling to the town. The troubled daughter. The leer. The girl with a criminal past. Didn't match the documentation sitting right in front of them. Evidence doesn't care about reputation, it just sits there, quiet, relentless, unarguable. By Wednesday afternoon the cracks started showing. Ellen's phone rang 3 times before lunch. The first call came from Dave, the restaurant manager in Granton, the one who'd cancelled my job interview 3 years earlier. His voice shook when he spoke. Briggs, I think I need to talk to you. Ellen put him on speaker. I still have the email, he said. What email? Ellen asked. The one with the police report attached. My stomach twisted. That fake report had cost me that job. It had cost me rent money. It had cost me months of trying to explain something I couldn't prove. Dave sighed. I believed it back then. I'm ashamed of that now. Ellen's voice stayed calm. Would you be willing to testify? There was a long pause. Then Dave said quietly, yes? I closed my eyes. For 3 years I'd felt like I was screaming into a void. Now, people were answering. The second call came from Bill Carter, who owned the Millfield hardware store. He had rejected my job application 2 summers ago after receiving a mysterious phone call. Bill sounded angry. Someone pretending to be a social worker called me, he said. Said hiring Caroline Johansson would be a liability. Ellen asked one question. Do you remember the voice? Bill didn't hesitate. Yeah. Another pause. Then he said something that made my heart pound. It was her mother. By Friday, Harland wasn't whispering anymore. It was talking. And Denise Johansson, the woman who had spent years telling neighbors she was protecting her troubled daughter, suddenly found herself answering uncomfortable questions. The first one came from Tom Adler. Tom had lived next door to my parents for 30 years. He ran into Denise at the gas station. Denise, he said slowly. Did you really call her employers? Ruth heard about the moment later from someone who had been standing by the soda machine. Apparently Denise froze. Didn't answer, just got in her car. And drove away. But my father doubled down. Because admitting he was wrong was something Gerald Johansson had never done in his life. That Monday night, he showed up at the town council meeting. The room was packed. 60 people at least. Word had spread that he planned to speak. I sat in the 3rd row beside Ellen. Not hiding. Not in the back. Right where he could see me. Gerald walked up to the podium like he always had. Confident, shoulders squared, wearing the same navy jacket he wore to church every Sunday. He cleared his throat. Most of you know me? He began. Classic opening. He looked around the room. I've lived in Harland my entire life. I coached Little League. I served on the planning committee. People nodded. Old habits die hard. Then his voice sharpened. And now my own daughter is trying to destroy this family with a frivolous lawsuit. My chest tightened. The word destroy echoed in the room. He pointed in my direction. She's been manipulated by outsiders. Lawyers. People who don't understand what families go through. My hands curled into fists. For a moment I thought about standing up, shouting the truth. But Ellen placed a hand on my arm. Wet, she whispered. Gerald leaned forward over the podium. I'm asking this community to stand with me. Silence filled the room. 8 seconds. Long enough to hear someone shift in their chair. Then Ellen stood. No drama, no anger. Just calm authority. My name is Ellen Briggs, she said. I'm a civil litigation attorney representing Caroline Johansson. Gerald's jaw tightened. Ellen continued. The lawsuit Mr. Johansson referenced has been filed in county court. Her voice was steady. The evidence is part of the public record. Anyone interested can review it themselves rather than relying on personal interpretations. She sat back down. That was it. No accusations, no speeches, just facts. And facts are louder than emotion when they're written in legal documents. The council chair cleared his throat awkwardly. Thank you, he said. Next item on the agenda. Gerald stood at the podium for a few seconds longer. Then he slowly stepped down. He didn't look at me again. That night, for the first time in years, I felt something strange. Not victory, not relief, just space. Like the walls around my life had moved a few inches farther away. But the real storm hadn't even started yet. Because 11 days later, the judge signed the civil protection order, and my father violated it within the week. Which meant the next chapter of this story was going to get a whole lot uglier, and a whole lot louder. The moment I realized my father would never stop was the day the judge ordered him to stay away from me. And he ignored it like it was a parking ticket. Because some people don't believe rules apply to them. And my father had spent his entire life proving that. The courtroom smelled like old paper and disinfectant. I sat beside Ellen at the plaintiff's table, trying not to stare at the back of my parents' heads. My mom's blonde hair was pulled into the same tight bun she wore to church every Sunday. My father sat stiffly beside her, arms crossed like this entire thing was some kind of joke. The judge, Judge Rebecca Lawson, flipped through the documents in front of her. The room was silent except for the soft shuffle of paper. Then she looked up. Mr. and Mrs. Johansson, she said calmly, the evidence submitted to this court is extensive. No emotion. Just facts. She turned another page. 37 phone calls to employers. Flip. 4 fabricated claims of criminal activity. Flip. And documented impersonation of a social worker. My father shifted in his seat, but the judge wasn't finished. She leaned forward slightly. Until this case proceeds to trial, the court is granting a civil protection order. My pulse thumped in my ears. This order prohibits Mr. and Mrs. Johansson from contacting Ms. Johansson directly or indirectly. That includes employers, friends, landlords, or associates. The words felt unreal. For years they'd been controlling every corner of my life. Now a judge was telling them to stop. Legally, officially, publicly. Judge Lawson's voice hardened just a little. Violation of this order will result in immediate legal consequences. She closed the file. Do you understand? My mother nodded quickly. My father didn't. He just stared straight ahead like a man watching a boring movie. And something about that expression made my stomach twist. Because it wasn't anger. It was dismissal. Like he'd already decided this didn't apply to him. For exactly 6 days the order held. 6 quiet, peaceful days. No strange phone calls. No emails. No mysterious background checks ruining job applications. For the first time in years, my life felt normal. I even started a new job at a small marketing firm in Granton. The same city where that restaurant job had been sabotaged. My manager, Tara, was sharp, funny, and the kind of boss who drank iced coffee at 7 a.m. like it was oxygen. On my 3rd day she leaned over my desk. Quick question, she said. Yeah. Why are you so good at crisis management? I laughed softly. Practice. She grinned. Well, you're saving my sanity. It felt good to hear that, to be seen as capable instead of damaged. I was finally building something. A real career, a real life. And then, on the 7th day my phone rang. It was Tara. Her voice sounded strange. Hey Caroline, can you come into my office? My chest tightened. Sure. I walked down the hallway slowly. Something in my gut already knew. When I stepped inside, Tara looked uncomfortable. She held a printed email in her hand. Did you have a legal issue in the past? My stomach dropped. Why? She handed me the paper. My eyes scanned the message. And my hands started shaking. Subject line Yargn The email claimed I had a violent criminal record and was currently under investigation. Attached was a fake police report. Again, the same lie. The same trick. The same sick strategy. But this time my father had made a very serious mistake. Because now there was a court order, and the sender email address. It wasn't anonymous. It came from a Gmail account using my father's real name. Ellen's office was silent as she read the email. Well, she said. That was fast. I stared at her. He violated the order? Yes, she said calmly, and he documented it beautifully. She printed 3 copies. One for the court. One for the police. One for the case file. Then she looked at me with the smallest smile I'd ever seen from her. Your father just turned a civil lawsuit into something much worse. 2 days later. The sheriff knocked on my parents' front door. Not to ask questions, to deliver a court summons for contempt. Word spread through Harland faster than a wildfire in August. By the time my parents showed up for the emergency hearing, half the town already knew. The courtroom was quieter this time, more tense. Judge Lawson looked irritated. She held up the printed email. Mr. Johansson, she said slowly. Are you aware of the court order issued 6 days ago? My father nodded. And did you send this email to Ms. Johansson's employer? Silence. My father glanced at his lawyer. The lawyer looked like a man reconsidering his entire career path. Finally, my father said, I was protecting my community. The judge blinked once. Then she said something that made the room go completely still. From your daughter. My father nodded again. And that was the moment I knew he truly believed his own lies. Judge Lawson placed the paper down carefully. Mr. Johansson, violating a protection order is not a matter of opinion. Her voice sharpened. It is a legal offense. My father opened his mouth to argue, but the judge raised a hand. No. The word echoed in the courtroom. You've said enough. She turned to the clerk. Schedule a full contempt hearing. Then she looked directly at my father. If the allegations are confirmed, this court will consider penalties including fines and possible jail time. The word jail landed like a bomb. My mother gasped. My father didn't react. But for the first time since this whole nightmare began. He looked uncertain. Outside the courthouse, I stood on the steps watching my parents walk toward their car. My mother looked shaken. My father looked furious. He opened the car door, then paused, and slowly turned toward me. For a moment, our eyes locked across the parking lot. The air between us felt electric, like a storm about to break. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. Not loudly, not angrily, just quietly enough for me to hear. This isn't over. And somehow, I knew he meant it, because 3 weeks later, a secret buried for 22 years would surface. And when it did, it would destroy everything my parents had built their lives on. The moment everything finally started to make sense was the day a sealed file from 22 years ago landed on Ellen's desk. And inside that file was the reason my parents had spent years trying to destroy my life. Not because I'd done something wrong, but because I'd learned something I was never supposed to know. It started on a quiet Thursday afternoon. I was sitting in the break room at work, halfway through a sad little microwave mac and cheese lunch, when my phone buzzed. Ellen. She never called during work hours unless something serious had happened. I stepped outside the office building into the cold March air. Hey? I answered. Her voice was unusually serious. Where are you? Outside the office. Good, she said. Stay there. I'm sending you something. A second later, my email pinged. Subject line. My heart started pounding. Ellen, what is this? She exhaled slowly. I had one of my investigators digging through county records. Old ones. How old? 22 years. My stomach twisted. I opened the attachment. It was a hospital record. Birth certificate paperwork, adoption documentation, court authorization forms. My eyes skimmed the page, then froze, because the names listed under biological parents were not the people who raised me. Not Gerald Johansson. Not Denise Johansson. Two names I'd never seen before stared back at me. Megan Rivera. Daniel Carter. My voice cracked. Ellen, what is this? She didn't soften the truth. It's your original birth record. The world felt like it tilted sideways. That's not possible, I whispered. Your parents listed on every document are Gerald and Denise. Not originally. Silence filled the line. Then Ellen said something that made my chest tighten. You were adopted. I leaned against the brick wall outside my office building. The cold air suddenly felt too thin to breathe. Why would they hide that? I asked. Ellen's voice stayed careful. Because the adoption wasn't typical. My pulse raced. What does that mean? Another pause. Then she said the words that changed everything. You weren't adopted through an agency. I frowned. Then how? It was a private family transfer. I blinked. What does that even mean? It means someone in your family had a baby they couldn't raise and another family member took the child. My stomach dropped. Wait. I swallowed hard. You're saying? Yes, Ellen said quietly. Your biological mother was Denise's younger sister. The memory hit me instantly. A woman from old family photos. Long dark hair. Warm smile. Always labeled as Aunt Megan. Except, she disappeared when I was very young. My parents never talked about her. Whenever I asked where she went, my mom would shrug. She moved away. That was it. No details. No stories. Just gone. And now suddenly she was my mother. I pressed my hand against my forehead. Oh my God. Ellen continued. Megan Rivera had you when she was 19. According to hospital notes, she was dealing with financial instability and asked her sister Denise for help. My throat tightened. So my mom took me? Was. The word felt heavy, but Ellen hadn't finished. There's more. Of course there was. There was always more. 3 years later, Ellen said slowly, your biological mother tried to regain custody. My breath caught. What? There was a family dispute. My mind raced. What happened? Ellen flipped a page on her end. The court denied the request. Why? Silence. Then Ellen said something that made my hands start shaking. Because Denise and Gerald testified that Megan was unstable, irresponsible, and possibly dangerous. The exact words my parents had used about me for years. My chest felt tight. They did the same thing to her. I whispered. Ellen didn't respond. Because she didn't need to. The pattern was obvious. Suddenly memories from my childhood started rearranging themselves. Arguments I wasn't supposed to hear. My mother snapping whenever I asked about Aunt Megan. My father once saying something strange during a fight when I was 16. Don't make us regret taking you in. At the time I thought he meant raising me. Now, the words meant something very different. Where is she? I asked quietly. Ellen hesitated. That's the part that concerns me. My stomach twisted again. What do you mean? There's no recent record of her. No address. No tax filings. No driver's license renewal. My pulse spiked. So she just disappeared. Possibly. Then Ellen added something even more unsettling. The last record of Megan Rivera is from 18 years ago. My voice dropped. What happened 18 years ago? Another pause. Then Ellen said the words that made the air leave my lungs. She filed a complaint. A complaint against who? Gerald and Denise Johansson. I felt cold all over. For what? Ellen's voice was quiet. For coercion and fraud during the adoption process. I slid down the wall outside the building until I was sitting on the concrete. The entire foundation of my life felt like it had cracked open. So let me get this straight, I said slowly. My parents lied to the court about my biological mother. Yes. They convinced everyone she was unstable. Yes. And now they've spent years telling people I'm unstable. Ellen didn't sugarcoat it. That's exactly what it looks like. A long silence passed. Then something inside me clicked. A realization so sharp it made my heart race. They're not just trying to control me, I whispered. They're trying to protect something. Yes, Ellen said softly. And now we know what it is. That night I sat alone in my apartment staring at the old family photo album my mom had given me years ago. I flipped through pictures slowly. Birthdays, Christmas mornings, family BBQs, and then, there she was. A photo of my mom and a young woman standing beside each other, both holding me as a baby. The caption written in my mother's handwriting said, Denise, Megan, and baby Caroline, summer 2004. I stared at Megan's face, my biological mother. The woman who had vanished. The woman my parents had erased. And suddenly one terrifying question filled my mind. Where was she now? Because if my parents had gone this far to control my life, what had they done to hers? 3 days later, Ellen's investigator would uncover something that turned this case from a family dispute into something much darker. Because Megan Rivera hadn't just disappeared. Someone had made sure of it, and the truth about that was buried in a police report no one had opened in nearly 2 decades. The moment I realized my parents' lies might be hiding something far darker was the night Ellen called me at 2:14 a.m. No one calls at 2 in the morning unless something has gone terribly wrong. Or something long buried has finally been uncovered. My phone vibrated on my nightstand, lighting up the dark room. Ellen Briggs. My stomach dropped before I even answered. Ellen. Her voice sounded different. Not calm, not composed, just quiet. Caroline, she said, I need you to come to the office tomorrow morning. My chest tightened. What happened? A pause. Then she said 4 words that made sleep impossible for the rest of the night. We found Megan's file. I barely remember driving to Granton the next morning. The sky was still gray, the roads half empty except for early commuters grabbing Starbucks and heading to the interstate. My hands gripped the steering wheel the entire way. When I walked into Ellen's office, she was already sitting at the conference table. A thick folder rested in front of her. Not a legal brief. Not court paperwork, a police report. She slid it toward me slowly. Before you read this, she said carefully, there's something you need to understand. My throat felt dry. Okay. This report was filed 18 years ago. The same year my biological mother had tried to fight for custody. The same year she disappeared. Ellen continued. It was marked inactive 3 weeks later. My chest tightened. Why? Because investigators believed it was a voluntary disappearance. I stared at the folder. The words Harland County CRAF's DAPT were stamped across the front. Below that missing person, Megan Rivera. My hands shook as I opened it. The first page was a basic report summary. Name Megan Rivera, age 24, last seen July 18, 2008, location Harland, Ohio. My heart pounded harder. Last known residence, Johansson family property. I looked up sharply. She was living with them? I asked. Ellen nodded. According to the report, Megan had moved back into your parents' house while she prepared a custody petition. My stomach twisted. So she wasn't some unstable runaway like my parents always implied. She was a young mother trying to get her daughter back. Me. I turned the page. Witness statements. Neighbors describing arguments. Raised voices. One line caught my eye instantly. Multiple witnesses reported hearing shouting between Megan Rivera and Denise Johansson the night before the disappearance. My chest tightened. I kept reading. Another statement. Witness reported seeing Megan leaving the house around 11:30 p.m., but did not observe direction of travel. The next page contained a police note. No signs of forced entry. No evidence of struggle. Case status: voluntary disappearance suspected. I looked up. That's it. Ellen leaned forward. That's what investigators concluded at the time. Something in her tone told me the story didn't end there. Then why call me at 2 in the morning? She slid another paper toward me. This was buried at the back of the file. I read the heading. OFFICR Jamis Kel Ear. My eyes scanned the paragraph, then stopped. My pulse exploded in my ears. Because the note said something investigators had apparently ignored. During interview with Gerald Johansson, subject displayed unusual hostility regarding Rivera custody case. Subject made statement, she's not taking that child back. Not after everything we've done. I looked up slowly. That sounds like a threat. Ellen nodded. Yes. My throat tightened. Did they investigate him? Briefly? What happened? She flipped another page. The date stamped at the top was 3 weeks later. Case status: closed. Insufficient evidence. Just like that. No follow-up. No deeper investigation. Nothing. 18 years of silence. I leaned back in the chair, my mind racing. My parents told everyone she ran away. Yes. They told me she moved to California. Yes. But she was actually trying to take me back. Ellen nodded again. And then she vanished. The room felt suddenly too quiet. I stared at the table. A terrible possibility creeping into my mind. What if she didn't run away? Ellen didn't answer immediately. Because she didn't need to. We were both thinking the same thing. My voice came out barely above a whisper. What if something happened to her in that house? Ellen exhaled slowly. That's exactly what my investigator started wondering. My heart started pounding harder. What investigator? His name's Marcus Shaw. She reached for her phone. I asked him to dig deeper into the old police report. And she met my eyes, and he found something the original investigators missed. My stomach twisted again. What? Ellen turned her laptop toward me. On the screen was an aerial satellite photo of my parents' property. The big white farmhouse. The barn. The wooded area behind the field. Marcus had circled a spot behind the barn. My voice shook. What is that? Ellen answered quietly. Ground disturbance. The words felt unreal. Meaning the soil was dug up. Around the same time Megan disappeared. My heart slammed in my chest. Are you saying? I'm saying. Ellen interrupted carefully. There may be a reason your parents worked so hard to destroy your credibility. My hands started shaking again. Because suddenly their behavior made terrifying sense. The sabotage. The lies. The smear campaign. If I was seen as unstable, if no one believed me, then no one would ever listen if I started asking questions. Questions like, what really happened the night Megan Rivera disappeared? I stared at the satellite image. At the patch of disturbed ground behind the barn where I used to play as a kid. Where my dad once told me not to dig holes because it would mess up the soil. My voice barely worked. What do we do? Ellen closed the laptop slowly. My heart raced. How? She smiled slightly. The same way we've done everything so far. By proving your parents lied. She tapped the police file. And by giving investigators a reason to look again. 3 days later, Harlan County detectives would arrive at my parents' property with a search warrant. And what they uncovered behind that barn would turn my parents' quiet little lies into a national news story. Because sometimes the truth doesn't stay buried, no matter how deep someone tries to hide it. The moment my entire life finally cracked open was the morning I watched police cars pull onto my parents' property. Not one car. Not two. 6. Harlan County Sheriff's Department vehicles rolled slowly down the gravel driveway like something out of a crime documentary, and I stood across the road with Ellen, my hands shaking so badly I had to shove them into my jacket pockets. Because the search warrant in the sheriff's hand meant only one thing. After 18 years, someone was finally asking the question no one had dared to ask before. What happened to Megan Rivera? The farm looked exactly the same as it had when I was a kid. The white farmhouse. The rusty red barn. The patch of woods behind the field where my dad used to warn me not to wander. I used to think he was just being overprotective. Now I knew better. Sheriff Mark Dalton stepped out of the lead vehicle, holding a folded document. My parents were already outside the house. My mother looked pale. My father looked furious. Dalton walked up the driveway calmly. Gerald Johansson. My father crossed his arms. That's me. Dalton held out the paper. We have a court-authorized search warrant for your property. My mother's voice cracked instantly. For what? Dalton didn't hesitate. Evidence related to the disappearance of Megan Rivera. The words seemed to echo across the yard. My mother's face drained of color. My father didn't move, didn't blink, didn't react at all. Which somehow made the moment even more terrifying. Within minutes, the property was full of investigators. Crime scene tape stretched across the back field. 2 officers walked toward the barn. Behind them came something that made my stomach twist. A ground-penetrating radar unit. The exact technology Ellen's investigator had suggested. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Ellen stood beside me quietly. "Whatever happens today," she said softly, "you deserve the truth." My eyes never left the barn. Because suddenly a memory came rushing back. A strange moment from when I was 8 years old. I had been playing near that same spot behind the barn, digging in the dirt with a plastic shovel. My dad had stormed outside, faster than I'd ever seen him move. "Caroline!" he shouted. I remember him grabbing the shovel from my hands, his face pale, his voice sharp. "Don't dig there." At the time I thought I'd done something wrong. Now I understood why he panicked. The radar scan took 30 minutes, 30 of the longest minutes of my life. Finally one of the technicians waved Sheriff Dalton over. They spoke quietly. Then Dalton turned toward the officers. "Mark the location." Bright orange flags appeared in the dirt, right behind the barn. Exactly where the investigator predicted. My stomach twisted so hard I thought I might throw up. Because there was only one reason police dig in a spot like that. The excavation began slowly. 2 officers used shovels first. Careful, methodical. Everyone watched in silence, even my father. But the moment the shovel struck something hard, the entire yard went still. One officer knelt down, brushed dirt away carefully, then looked up at the sheriff. My heart was pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. The officer said one word. "Bones." My mother collapsed to her knees. The rest of the day blurred together. Crime scene technicians, photographs, evidence markers, forensic teams. They uncovered a full skeleton buried 3 feet underground. Alongside it, a rusted necklace. Ellen squeezed my shoulder when she saw it. "That'll be used for identification." But I already knew. Because I'd seen that necklace before, in the family photo album. Around Megan Rivera's neck. By evening, the sheriff placed my parents in handcuffs, right there in the driveway where I'd ridden my bike as a kid. My father didn't fight, didn't shout. But his eyes locked on mine as the deputies led him past me. For the first time in my life, he looked afraid. Sheriff Dalton read the charges calmly. "Gerald Johansson and Denise Johansson, you are under arrest for the suspected homicide of Megan Rivera and obstruction of justice." The word homicide felt like a thunderclap. My mother started crying hysterically. "It was an accident!" she screamed. The entire yard froze. Dalton turned slowly. "Mom," she covered her face. "We didn't mean to hurt her." My chest tightened. Because suddenly, the truth was spilling out. The confession came 2 hours later at the sheriff's office. Ellen sat beside me as we listened through the glass of the interview room. My mother's voice shook as she spoke. "Megan came to the house that night," she said. "She said she was taking Caroline back." My heart twisted hearing my own name. She said she had a lawyer, that the court would force us to give her custody. My father sat silently beside her, jaw clenched. "She threatened to expose everything." My mother continued. "Everything?" the detective asked. My mother hesitated, then whispered the truth. "That we lied during the adoption hearing." The room went silent. Then she said the sentence that shattered whatever illusion of family I still had left. Gerald lost his temper. I couldn't breathe. "She fell," my mother said. "She hit her head on the barn floor." The detective leaned forward, and then, my father finally spoke. Cold, flat. "We buried her." I left the sheriff's office just before midnight. The sky above Harland was dark and quiet. For the first time in 22 years, the truth was finally out. My parents had stolen a child, destroyed a woman's reputation. And when she tried to take her daughter back, they killed her. Then they spent years trying to destroy me so no one would ever look too closely. 6 months later, I stood at Megan Rivera's real gravesite for the first time. The court had ordered a proper burial. Her headstone read, "Megan Rivera 1984-2008 mother, sister fighter." I placed a hand on the cold stone. "I'm sorry it took so long," I whispered. The wind moved softly through the trees. And for the first time in my life, I felt something I never thought I'd feel again. Freedom, because the people who spent years trying to erase me were finally the ones being erased by the truth. And the girl they tried to silence, she was still standing.